Mr. Jones.
Morning. It's an honor and privilege for me to be here and share with you all. As you mentioned, you have my remarks in printed format, so I'm not going to read through that, just share the highlights as you've requested. I'm the Communications Outreach Associate for the organization Smart Approaches to Marijuana, bipartisan national organization founded by former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, David Frum, and Dr. Kevin Sabet. And we work on marijuana policy. Specifically, we want to see it move forward in a way between two extremes. And what I mean by that is this. The conversation for marijuana nationally has often been on the extremes of either incarceration or commercialization. And we believe both of those are extremes in marijuana policy that should be avoided. And the path forward is along the lines of decriminalization, which has already been discussed, but it is important to point out the dangers of commercialization and why decriminalization and commercialization should not be conflated. I tell people the reason I'm so passionate about this issue and so vocal and opposed to the commercial marijuana industry is because when I walk out the front door of my house, down the street in any direction, the first store that I get to is a liquor store. If I go a little bit farther, I might get to a convenience store, but it's so plastered with advertisements for alcohol, tobacco, and the lottery that I can't even see inside the windows of that store. And that is the reality for millions in communities like mine across the United States. This is the reality of marijuana commercialization. People say that it's 2019, that we can do a better job with marijuana regulation than we've done with alcohol and tobacco. I began working on this when I heard legislation that was titled Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol. And looking in my community, I hate what we've done with alcohol, and it disturbed me that we said we would treat something else like we've treated alcohol. People say, well, we don't mean exactly like that. We'll do it better than we've done with alcohol. It's not exactly the same. We just mean you should be able to buy it at the store and it should be regulated. But if we look at what's happened in every state that's had an opportunity to show that they could do better in 2019, we see in Colorado the disproportionate stores are continued to be located in disenfranchised communities of color, where there's one pot shop for every 47 residents in communities of color in Denver, Colorado. There's more pot shops than Starbucks and McDonald's combined there. So imagine every time that you see a McDonald's store or a Starbucks, replace that with a pot dispensary and add some more. And the industries, the players that are controlling this industry that have invested billions of dollars in the past year alone are the same industries that are disproportionately located, targeting our communities of color across the country, where we have the top liquor industries and tobacco industries that have again invested billions of dollars in the past year alone. Altria has invested $13 billion over the past year in the marijuana industry. Molson Coors, Heineken, so again, the top industries are investing heavily in this, and we're fooling ourselves if we think that we're going to be able to regulate them. Once again, in 2018, where we say that we can control and regulate an industry, we have Juul, which was mentioned earlier, has seen skyrocketing use by youth. So we show that these big industries, we still cannot control them in 2019. They're increasing youth use, and Altria, once again, has invested heavily in Juul. And I find it interesting to think that suddenly, because they have a marijuana product, that they're going to begin to responsibly regulate themselves, that they're not going to continue their patterns that they have to this day of disproportionately targeting, placing themselves in communities of color, and therefore the path forward cannot be commercialization. That cannot be the answer to the problems of social justice that we have with this. Now, I want to make the distinction, though, that we recognize the fact that the enforcement of marijuana laws, punitive marijuana laws, has disproportionately been a burden in communities of color, and that is something that is despicable, frankly, and should be changed. But there's nothing that we can accomplish through commercialization in terms of social justice that cannot be accomplished through decriminalization, expungements of records, and freeing those that are currently incarcerated for nothing more than possession of marijuana. Those things should be done and move forward apart from commercialization. It should be done irrespective of whether or not we commercialize the product. I find it ironic and sad that legalization and commercialization is seen as the answer to the injustices in the systemic discrimination that is in our criminal justice system. And let me explain what I mean by that. The campaign for legalization in Washington, D.C. said, legalization ends discrimination. That is the campaign slogans that they had pasted on every single signpost around the city. Legalization does not end discrimination. We've seen that, in fact, what it does is gives a free pass to those who have been enforcing the law in a discriminatory manner. So instead of holding them accountable, and I don't want to paint with a broad brush and say that every police officer or department is corrupt, but for those that have been enforcing the law in a discriminatory manner, for the individuals or departments that have that on their record, we should be prosecuting them. We should be removing them from positions of power. We should be holding them accountable for how they've enforced the law in a discriminatory manner. But we should not fool ourselves to think that because we legalize, that an issue of the heart, which is racism and discrimination, is going to be solved. And further, if we look at the data of what's happened in states that have legalized, there's no state that following the passage of their legalization that the prison population was reduced. In fact, in places like Colorado and Washington, D.C., where I live, years of a declining trend in our prison populations was then changed to an increase in the prison population, because again, this is an issue of the heart, and we cannot say that commercialization is going to fix the systemic problems of discrimination and unequal law enforcement that exist within our country. In Colorado, according to the Colorado Department of Revenue, the best available data that we have, and I'm going to put an asterisk by this because some cities were missing from this data, but according to in 2016, according to the Colorado Department of Revenue, arrests for white youth decreased 8% after legalization, while it increased 58% for black youth and 35% for Latino youth. Again, the prison populations have nowhere dropped after corresponding with the passage of legalization. And so when we conflate these two issues of social justice in reforming our criminal justice system with a multi-billion-dollar commercial industry that wants to have our dollars, that is already disproportionately placing itself in our communities in states that have legalized, we're doing a disservice to social justice and true criminal justice reform. And I urge all of you here to look at this issue closely, to look at what's happened in terms of verifiable data with the incarcerated population, with arrests, and remember, again, that there are still laws around marijuana use in places where it's legal. So, for example, public use is still illegal in many places. It's still illegal under the age of 21. It's still illegal to be driving under the influence. So for those officers that enforce the law in a discriminatory manner, there's still ample opportunity, in fact, increased opportunity for them to execute their bias because there's more people using their products. A last note I will say is that our community is also disproportionately impacted because whereas about 40% of whites are in occupations where they will be tested for drug use, that's over 60% for people of color. Once again, our communities will be disproportionately impacted by the commercialization of this product. So we must distinguish, again, I will conclude with this, we cannot play into the hands of a multi-billion-dollar commercial industry that wants to appropriate issues of social justice to line their own products with a new industry. We can focus on decriminalization, expungements, removing criminal penalties for use of marijuana, and those that are currently incarcerated solely for that should be liberated, which has not happened in any state yet that has legalized, because that has not been the focus of commercialization of marijuana. Thank you.
The difficulty I have with your position on decriminalization is that if you allow a market for someone to, if you allow someone to consume a product, but don't allow them to legally purchase the product from someone who is legally selling the product, that by definition creates a black market. Black markets cannot be enforced by calling the police or filing a lawsuit. Black markets can only be enforced through violence. And every dollar that does not go to an entrepreneur who is licensed goes to a cartel. And I'm wondering, if you support decriminalization, which I thought you said you supported, what, and therefore I'm allowed to consume it, who should I buy it from?
Thank you for that question.
I knew Ed wanted to ask that. I just wanted to screw him on that.
And
but yeah, who should I buy that from? What remedy should I have if they rip me off or if they sell me a bad product? What testing and so forth should that product undergo? How would that be done in a non-legal market? Explain how this works.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to tie it into your prior question about the difference between alcohol prohibition and what we have with marijuana. The issue with alcohol is that well over 50% of the population regularly use alcohol for civilizations. It was something that was a part of the majority of our civilization. And then we had an industry that we tried to shut down and say, you can't sell this anymore, close all the businesses, go away. Of course that's not going to work. We don't have that with marijuana, where according to most national estimates, it's between 10 to maybe 15% of the population that regularly uses it, and we don't have the established legal industry that we had with alcohol, so prohibition is not really analogous in that respect. This ties into the question of where should people obtain it, because once again, it's not as high a percentage of the population, anywhere near as high, that uses it currently, and there's nothing that prevents people from, if it's not prosecuted, so if we remove it from the perspective of this is something that police should be going to enforce. People should, if you want to grow it in the basement of your home or what have you, or in your backyard, the government shouldn't care. Police shouldn't care. It should be a non-factor, and you can obtain it that way. But it is not a necessity. So to say that you have to buy it from the store because everyone's using it, of course there will be some people that would like to buy the product from the store, but it's nowhere near as much used as alcohol, and there's nothing, again, there. If you're growing it in your house or in your backyard or something like that for personal use, there's no reason that the government or law enforcement should care that you're doing that, and that is a perfectly viable way to obtain your product.
And my quick question to you is this. When we had a previous incarnation of this discussion with your colleague Kevin Sabet, I sent him an email afterward asking if he'd be willing to debate me on statewide television on this issue. He never replied. Do you know why that is, and would you or him or your organization be willing to debate this on statewide television?
I don't read his personal email, so I'm not sure what happened with that, but we accept, as an organization, I know that we accept and welcome the opportunity to debate anyone at any place or platform.
All right, so I'm going to get your card, I'm going to email you, and we'll hold you to that. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I just want to highlight that is where we should, when we're talking about criminal justice reform, we can respond. We have, like New York has decriminalization laws, but they're ineffective. We know there's still many people arrested for that. But if we're truly concerned about social justice, criminal justice reform, we can focus on those specific things where there is no criminal penalty at all. As you're mentioning, I think those are the important questions.
Yeah, but in the situation that you talked about when it comes to how we grow marijuana, you talking about in the basement or somebody's house or in the backyard, that's not feasible, because at the end of the day, in urban settings where we don't have that, then you would still have a black market that you would be cultivating, because in that cultivation, you would say, since you don't have anything, where else are they going to get it? So if you're saying that you're not for commercialization, but you're for decriminalization, at the end of the day, you did not give a report of those that's living in that type of condition where they would receive the product from.
For example, in Vermont, in DC, you can grow it and you can share it. And so it should be, again, we're not talking about something that's a necessity for life. We're talking about something, and I'm not talking about medical either. So if you need it for medicinal purposes, you should be able to buy it from the store, know what you're getting, know what's in the product, of course. But for recreational use, that's not, at all a necessity. And so it should be something that, to say that the black market is going to go away, there's no state, by the standard metrics that we measure the black market, there's no state that has shown a reduction in that. For example, Colorado in 2004, I believe it was 5,000 plants that received. 2014, it was 50,000 plants that received. Even in Canada, which is legalized at the national level, still the black market has not been reduced by any standard metric of measuring the black market. So this is not something that's going to disappear. There will always be a black market. The question is, how do we have the smallest black market? And commercialization, which creates an increased appetite for use of the product. And many states have laws, again, on how much you can buy in the store. You can only buy a certain amount. People will still turn to the black market after they've exceeded the amount that they're allowed to buy at their store. Or again, we've talked about the taxation issues. And so it would be helpful if there was a state that showed showed a significant reduction in their black market, or even a country, but that has not yet happened. And again, we know even with tobacco, the black market for tobacco between Virginia and New York State alone is over $5 billion. When you have a giant legal market of something like with alcohol or tobacco, there will always be somewhat of a black market. Keeping it, though, decriminalizing it would keep the black market smaller than a commercial industry on the level of what we have with Marlboro and the major alcohol companies.